Okay, hi everybody. It looks like I'm securely back on. Namaste, it's Ben, or Brother Eli, at the Summit Lighthouse. And today we're talking about elementals. And principally my objective is to give you the information on elementals that I possess that I believe is supplemental to the public information to date coming out of the Summit Lighthouse, but valid. You know, I've studied the matter for a long time. And as I mentioned in some other videos, I began as an earth-based uh, religion practitioner years back, over a decade ago, when before I started at the Summit Lighthouse. So animals and elementals, we used to refer to them as familiars when they were in our households, um, are an important topic and vital to me. I also have experience working in the veterinary industry. When I was much younger, when I was in high school, I worked in a veterinary facility for, I think, 4 years. And then briefly I was enrolled as a veterinary technician student, and ended up discontinuing my involvement in that. But I was a VA, or also known as a veterinary assistant, for quite a while. So I've really seen the gamut. I've seen everything that goes on that could possibly occur in a veterinary office, and for better or worse. Um, and certainly I care greatly about animals. Um, so, but, and I'll read you, I'll look up what someone has to say officially on the website at the encyclopedia. But I just want to point out a couple of things because they stand out to me as points that need to be articulated. One is that you have the animals to an extent, you have the elementals on one hand and then human beings on the other hand. They're not identical creatures, but in a way they possess more similarity than the amount of similarity to which we admit. And that's kind of interesting. We have a culture in the United States and around the world of, sure, we're very inclusive of the animals we term domestic, and popularly we've said, well, cats really began as tigers, and over the successive rounds of uh, genetic change that occur as a part of evolution, or that we claim occurs as part of evolution, became miniaturized basically, and manageable as household animals. So, and I think also part of the popular myth is that the Egyptians started domesticating cats too because they're good mousers. I don't believe that necessarily. that cats are around. Actually, I shouldn't say that about the Egyptians, because the Egyptians actually revered cats, and we'll talk more about that as well. But some scientists and anthropologists say, well, it's really because the cats are good mousers. I don't think that we keep cats around because they're good mousers. I think we keep them around for other reasons. I don't think that the world is going to be overrun with mice in the absence of domesticated cats, if you know how that goes, or would be overrun. But it would be interesting just to take a look at the Egyptian cat goddess and gods, and maybe that's something that we can do later on in this video. Let's see. My other point, and dogs, of course, began as wolves. They claim, right, wild wolves, and then slowly they came into the human circle when humans and dogs realized that they could have a mutually beneficial exchange. I'm not sure what's true in that and what is just speculation. I'm pretty sure that, I know that a lot of the stuff that we claim historically is just really for convenience, and it's just part of a shared narrative, shared system of beliefs, which some of that is fine and some of it should be challenged. But, so you have animals and people, but we're talking in terms of elementals when we speak of animals at church. And animals are really to be respected, and they're really part of God, and they're really part of when we hold them in our hearts. And so we do publicly support animal rights, to an extent. Not all of us are vegetarian, but there is a trend towards vegetarianism within CUT, I would say. And that the whole issue with the origins of vegetarianism in the Bible is something that I took up separately in a video that I recorded on Noah, on the topic of Noah's Ark. That's an opportunity for the church as well, because that's not known necessarily by all churches, that before the fall of man, if you study the Bible, you'll discover it, but it's not necessarily taught in all of the churches, with the possible exception, well, with several exceptions, but I know the Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarian. I wonder if it's because of the references in the Old Testament. But before the fall of man, Adam and Eve did not eat meat, and it's only after the fall, after Eve violated God's trust by partaking of the forbidden apple, did God say, you will now eat the animals instead of just naming them. Previously, when animals would approach Adam and Eve and they would say, this is a horse, this is a dog, and so forth. He named the animals. Rather, Adam and Eve named the animals, they didn't consume the animals. I make this point in another video, and I'll link you to that Noah's Ark information. But we all know, and I think within church, know and love and care about animals, but there are some deceptions to be dodged, and some esoteric information I'd like to share regarding animals. First is that I have been instructed by the animal kingdom very clearly, and I think it's pure, it's pure information. And in praying on the matter, one thing that was revealed to me is that they consider themselves kind of akin to an army. Mother, not all the time necessarily, but I think they see a need to help humanity, and they understand the need to help humanity, and they arrive among our ranks for that reason, to help. They come to help. That was presented to me very clearly, and they have other reasons to be, and other needs, I believe, as well. I think that one of the bits of information that I received is that it's erroneous to see elementals as being subordinate to human beings. Sure, human beings are more powerful in a way, and we have the choice to say we will treat you badly or we will treat you well, because we have opposable thumbs and because our culture is so developed and overdeveloped, as a matter of fact. I mean, evil was not created by the animals, evil was truly created by mankind. Although animals, I think, struggle with natural impulses, probably, or can. One of the messages that I received from them when I was praying on the subject was, and I didn't really finish the full thought because I could empathize, was if you think it's hard to be a human being, try being an animal out in the cold in the middle of the winter, or an animal, and by that I think they really meant, by winter, I believe that they really meant abandonment in general, isolation and abandonment. It's hard for them as well. It's not just human beings who suffer, in other words. So it's hard to be a human being. It's hard in part because we are so evolved. Certain parts of our minds and hearts are evolved. But animals also have evolved sensibilities as well. They're different, but to see them as definitionally inferior is false. I don't believe that at all. And as a matter of fact, there's an esoteric teaching that you will reach within church, and you don't have to be in TSL, I don't think, to understand this, where you understand that it's pointless to say human beings are more important than animals. Sure, you love your husband or wife in a way that differs from how you love your cat, but it's a different kind of love. And some of that love is actually the same love. People's affection for their children are very similar to how people feel about their cats and dogs, and that's for a reason as well. So that was part of the information was from them. We're here to help. We consider ourselves equal but different, and the true information is that they really are equal and different. Two streets over, fire burns down, and the guy and a fire destroys a house and the man dies, but so do two dogs, and um, it is a loss to the community that is more detectable when the man dies, but it could be very well that the man was not fulfilling his function karmically, or he was not a quote-unquote good person, or that it was a laggard. And the animals, it was revealed to me that they don't really have laggards. So that's an important distinction. Human beings can be fallen or not fallen. Human beings can be progressed and enlightened and part of the GWB, the Great White Brotherhood, or they can be evil, fallen people affected by discarnates, or have a fallen angel in them or over them. What was revealed to me, and Mother might have a little bit of a different opinion, but I don't think that I'm off base, is that animals, yeah, sure, you might say that they're not human and they don't have the full human sense of, they don't have human objectives necessarily, or the same potential, but they also don't make quote-unquote bad animals. They make animals that are either domesticated or not. Any animal out there may be saved, in other words. You can't say that about people. So my bad, rotten ex-family member who lives 2 countries away, or 3, or who's just out of the country, or whatever, their canines are still good creatures, although they're affected and shall not be permitted to serve or function within those sorts of households. You know, you want to pray for the liberation of animals from those sorts of fallen environments. That's true as well. So animals are very important, and it's important that we treat them the right way. It's important that they're revered where necessary, but also that we have a practical approach to assisting them and interacting with them that is sustainable, but also ethical. Additionally, it's incredibly important that animals are treated well. They're also powerful tools magically. If you, and speaking from the standpoint of Wicca, and I believe that this is probably CUT as well, in magical work, one would ask a cat familiar or a pet familiar to join the circle. You don't force an animal, in other words, to participate in your magical work, but they're welcome to join. However, they have free will as well. So you want to ask before insisting that, you know, an animal does your bidding, although I think probably generally you'll find that the predisposition is to participate and assist. And we also do, sure, control animals in a way that are, you know, it's natural for them to follow most of the time, or all of the time. I don't think anybody really has a, you know, possesses dogs because you want the dog to run the household, in other words. Although, in theory, I suppose some cats and dogs try to run households, or manage to, maybe, at the end of the day. But so they're important. But they're important in part for those reasons that I believe are just sort of part of this new dispensation to which I referred, or I refer to the Blue Lotus dispensation, and hear information and think, okay, well, this is probably accurate. But I do, as I stated in other videos, I do check with the standard system, if you will, with Elizabeth and so forth to verify. But right, so equally important. I think access to free will, likely. That's hard to say because there's an argument that they're often running instinctively as well. But people do that too. People act on instinct and impulse all the time. Do we reason? Yeah, we reason. But animals reason as well. You know, that squirrel or that ferret finds a way through the maze based upon experience and can remember and learn, and that's reasoning as well. I don't know, I think it's incredibly cynical to think that animals do not have the capacity to love and so forth. Now, the difference, and what you won't read in some of the New Age churches necessarily, including some of the competing churches, is that animals, what I know as a former anthropologist, animals are different in part because of how they use language. So it's not really lack of capacity or lack of reason. It's really the language is different, and that's all you can really prove at the end of the day. When you think about animal behaviorism and animal training and animal scientists and so forth, and what they say about I don't know, certain breeds of dogs behaving in a certain manner, and so forth, and what is genetic and all of that and what isn't. Well, a lot of that is human perception, which you can say the same thing about science. Science, generally put, is really a set of stories. Some of it inimical to humanity, and some of it, a lot of it, fraught with lies that ultimately, for instance, this whole thing with the coronavirus, lies that will ultimately affect humanity negatively. And affect families negatively as well, because people aren't really saying what's going on. They're using a scientific code, and it's too destructive to people who have been injured by science. Um, Speaking of that, that's the sort of aberration that animals can detect. Okay, animals are incredibly perceptive, and without being told in human speech, in articulated speech, in individual words, I think we call it, I'm trying to think if it's iconographic speech that we use. Iconographic, it's a blend of iconographic references and so forth. I'm not, I don't have my book on linguistics open presently, but that would be where I would begin. Animals do communicate as well, okay? But what some anthropologists believe is that they communicate by, there are a couple of different ways. We speak in complex terms, full sentences, elaborate thoughts. Sure, it's going to differ from region to region, and it'll differ, our language differs geographically as well. The concept of snow in Alaska is very important. That's why there are 30, 40 different words for snow, whereas in our part of the world, in Inuit, in the Inuit languages, there are all sorts of different words for snow, where in order to express certain kinds of road conditions or certain kinds of snow, we use longer sentences and more complex thoughts, because we don't have those um, uh, distilled words that are refined in the Inuit language. And with animals, it's similar. The first thing that an anthropologist would say about the difference between animal speech and um, human speech is that humans speak in complex code, use a coded references, where animals will tell you what's going on within the immediate environment, because that's what's important to them. Okay, so that's different as well. A bark is alerting you, is an alert, in other words. Whereas people want to talk about the cause of the bark by describing it in words. The animal will just claim that the moon's out and howl, for instance, or claim that there's an intruder and bark, or bark for another reason. So that's different, and that's a form of, technically, I believe it's a form of speech. And then, if you think about it, dolphins have a very complex, have complex language, where they think that they're actually communicating whole messages. And yet we have this in whales, humpback whales and so forth, dolphins with their clicking and so forth. They think that, scientists believe that not only are they able to identify each other and call individual dolphin members, if you will, but they're able to relay complex information about, I don't know, the location of food, or who knows? I mean, who knows how elaborate they get? But that was my understanding when I read the study of the humpback whales and the dolphins, is that they think that we don't understand it, but they think that it's an actual language more akin to human speech in some respects. So that's interesting as well. But it's, in other words, we are culturally conditioned to say that dogs are inferior because they only bark. But then maybe those barks have a whole extra layer of meaning, you know. However, it's not apparent to human beings. So there's a barrier there that's based on language, and it's kind of like before, after what is it, Babel, the Tower of Babel in the Bible. After God, when did you strike it down? All the language became confused. People couldn't understand each other anymore. It's as if we've been separated from understanding an animal's uh, reason-based language where it exists. Also, in my corollary to that as well, when people talk about that difference, the linguistic difference, is that people communicate psychically, so what's to say that the animals aren't doing the exact same thing? You know, and I think that, overwhelmingly there's evidence that that is the case. But in speaking about this whole thing with the alleged pandemic and all of that problem, which fortunately is in the stages of abating after significant loss by the church and very painful process of healing from what the government did to people in our position. The animals recognize when there's something wrong. Often they have a mental finger on, or are able to indicate, not indicate necessarily, but they're aware if there's something so out of whack that something needs to change. I've been in households before where there's been some sort of violence or disturbance in the household because of an unresolved tension among the people living within the home, and the change experienced by one of those members that is positive can affect the entire array, the entire manner in which the animals interact. I've personally seen it. I've seen animals go from being so fearful that the minute anybody walks into the house, they hide under the bed, and they really basically only come out of food. In households that are, I don't know, just unsettled for some reason, too much tension between certain members, or one of the members is afflicted by, I want to say an addiction, but I'm not sure if that's a fair characterization. Just has some sort of energy around them that causes strife that is not necessarily even seen or appreciated by the people in the family, but is understood by the animals. When that human member changes, or the household restructures in some way, it entirely affects those animals that were previously affected. In other words, that animal that hides, and where everybody says for the last 10 years, all this cat does is hide under the bed and run when you try to pet it, and is just supremely skittish, that animal can still, after 10 years, after becoming a full adult, living that way, can still experience a turnaround, a complete turnaround. So people talk about training their dogs and cats. I entirely support doing that the right way. Never use a choke collar, never use a prong or shock collar of any kind when you're training your animals. Entirely inappropriate to do that. And I can point in the direction of the right guilds for anybody who's interested in that. And I'm a member of the police, a police canine organization as well. So animals need to be protected. They should be viewed as individuals. They can change. They do communicate. Yes, they're different, but they're equally important to human beings, and it's important that that's acknowledged. But I'll tell you a quick story, and I'll have to dig out my raven information because I had an experience once with a raven. I mean, I think it's fine to say that I'm conversant. I say I'm conversant with the masters, and that I receive parts of the dispensation, and some of that is oral transmission. Some of it is unspoken oral transmission. And it's coming through the psychic realms, not the astral, but rather the etheric, the purified realms. You have to be careful, of course, because you don't want to open up your heart or your mind to the fallen, who will try to talk to you through that lower watery, confused morass realm. But yeah. The animals will talk to you, and I had a conversation with, I swear to God, I had a conversation with a bird one time where I had encountered this raven in the woods, and I had checked him out, and he hadn't seen me yet, and I was left a letter. I'll show it to you. I'll have to dig that out, maybe talk about it a little bit separately, because it's so interesting. And really that's part of the work that I did a lot when I was before CUT. And of course, I still talk to the elementals and receive information from them to this day, but my particular involvement started at that point when I was really in my 20s, in my teens too, really, beginning at around age 15 or 16. But the raven left me a note. I mean, a letter, but it really, really on my computer, and what talked on and on and on and on, and you could not see any sort of human backing to it at all. It was like pure, not pure animal. It was that individual bird. Okay, and one of the things that he said to me was what I can, and I was really surprised that this was even an issue to them. Is I asked, how is it that, I talked about what it's like to be a bird, and I would receive some answers, interestingly, but I also received gifts. Well, primarily, like I would receive, crystals, specific kind of crystals, a marble, for instance, very raven, to leave like a marble or a bead. But he had a bunch of, and tree, he would talk about the different kinds of trees and so forth, and he'd make selections for me to, with which he said I should work, and I did save that folder. One of the things that he said that they knew, okay, the bird kingdom, and then the animals I think generally put, was that he could see the fallen police system around me and around the light bearers, and that was their concern. And one way in which one of their concerns and one of their efforts, I think, was to warn against that. And he said it was really based upon they can detect fallen people. They detect the fallen. It's a different color to them. It's a different. They know by looking, and they can see when a bird's on the wire and is looking down at you, and they know that you're a light bearer. And then they see all these problems because when you go to town, when you make it there, there are going to be all these fallen people there because they can see it and they recognize it as fallen energy. I had no clue, but it makes sense if you think about it. In fact, that was probably the principle. After I was given my bead and I'll tell you what, it's like a beech tree or leaf. I'm not exactly sure. And he had there was a song he sang because he didn't realize that he thought I was a tree. At first, because I'd been looking at him very slowly, and I remember startling this bird just by moving a little bit. And he thought, how can a tree be moving? So he left me like a song about that. I'll pull it up, as I said, and put it in a different video. But the right, what he said was that he could see the police. And he could see that it was a problem. He can see that there's a problem. If you're an innocent who's disempowered, and you're a light bearer who's disempowered, the animals can sense it. They can sense it because they can see it. So that was basically what was presented to me after my conversation with the raven. I don't know that he asked why. I don't know. He just acknowledged that that's a problem. To have two different kinds of people where one of the groups is improperly enthroned, and the other group is not empowered. And I think part of that too has to do with the Babylonian money magic that runs private enterprise, which is not always, we support free enterprise, and according to Mother, free enterprise is the more God-directed way. Which I have an appreciation for, the notion of a free market. But sometimes a free market in which other people who are not light bearers are running the show is dangerous to the safety and privacy and welfare of the individual light bearer who doesn't have access. That's not appropriate either. So, and I suspect that that's the same way with the police. All this shopkeeping that is inimical or just designed to include, which happens all around this town, my friends. Where I am in Gardner, Maine, this ashram is afflicted by that on a daily basis. The fact that I have to kowtow and I have to bow, not only during Corona, but also during all these other situations. It's dangerous. It's dangerous not to own. It's dangerous when people forget to pay and walk out who are light bearers and who are punished as a consequence. All of that, as opposed to having an understanding light bearer running the whole system. who works in concert with other light bearers to make sure that the markets are fair and accessible and not involving the police, and not dependent upon police, that sort of Babylonian death magic. So that was the message from the elementals when I read it. Now I'm going to look up and see if I can find what Summit said. One of the other points too, which I haven't studied yet, is the following. One of the people I studied online who was either in CUT or in a similar organization said that the difference between human beings and mankind, human beings and the elementals, are that the elementals lack what is known as fifth manas, M-A-N-A-S. They don't have that, and I'm not sure if that's true or not, because I haven't really studied what that means. However, I know in the past that attempts to relegate animals to a lesser station, in theory or in philosophy, really does fail, according to my interpretation, because people start saying, it, 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 we don't know that they're not communicating intelligently. We don't know. We only know what we see, and we can only use our standard to evaluate it. In other words, so there's so many unknowns that a fifth manas, they could very well have a fifth manas, and it's just hidden to us. So, but I will look that up, and that is on my list of things to look up. But what I'm going to right now, let's see what this is. Okay. And instead of Google, I need to go directly to the encyclopedia, but you have to put in TSO. Okay, so elemental is going to come up right away. Actually, but as body elemental without my even asking at all. I didn't even put in elemental. I just popped up body elemental. But I don't want to go to Pinterest. I want to go directly to the encyclopedia because I don't want reposts. I want the actual. And you know, when I say elementals, for people who long-standing members probably know, but there are sets of elementals associated with each of the chakras. Okay, so we say Chohans, which are lords. For El Moria is the lord of the first ray. Paul the Venetian is the lord of the heart. Nada, Lady Master Nada is the lord of the solar plexus. And then we have archangels associated with each of those too, and an archaea, which archaea is just female. It's a female version of an archangel, or the twin flame, I guess, of an archangel's twin flame. But elementals also, you know, for each of those, each of the 8 chakras. Rather, Elohim. They're called Elohim, but they're associated with the elementals, or they have rulership, I believe, over the elementals. Elohim are a little different from elementals, and maybe we can get into that too. Okay, so let's see. Okay, there's a lot of really negative stuff on my board right now, and that's not good. We're not a cult. This is Summit Lighthouse. Okay, encyclopedia. I have it right here. Okay, so elementals. Okay, so a lot of this is from Kuthumi. It's quite a read. I'm not sure if you need to hear all of this. Okay, so Kuthumi, so the topic header is elementals. And I'm going to tell you the 4 kinds of elementals associated with the 4 elements. And this is really important, really good stuff, actually. Beings of earth, air, fire, and water, nature spirits who are the servants of God and man, and the planes of matter for the establishment and maintenance of the physical plane as the platform for the soul's evolution. Those are elementals. Elementals who serve the fire element are called salamanders. Those who serve the air element sylphs. Those who serve the water element undines. Those who serve the earth element gnomes. Okay, and one of the traditions at church, if you're hanging out with church people and families who grew up at CUT, is you'll often hear people say, "I dropped my glasses on the floor." Catholics would invoke, and I can't find them. Catholics would invoke probably Saint Anthony, whereas we'd say, "Let's ask the gnomes," or the gnomes will take care of um, a problem that you left behind. You're going on vacation and you just mowed your lawn, but you don't have lawn. You left lawn clippings and didn't clean up. Well, that's not that big of a problem because the gnomes will stay behind and take care of them. And also, we also send gnomes when we see stuff like litter as well. And if there's a concern about water pollution and you're running a boat, maybe, I think, and, well, is my gas getting into the water sort of thing, we would say the undines are going to come in and clean. Undines will appear and purify the water, again, because that's part of their mission. We have Kuthumi, who knew a great communion with elemental life in his embodiment as St. Francis, speaks in Corona class lessons of the work of the elementals. The life of God is present in the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms and throughout the unseen world of nature spirits. A kingdom teeming with elemental life, the happy chatter of elves and fairies, gnomes at work, though not always whistling, sylphs arranging clouds and tumbling in the winds, undines splashing in the waves, and salamanders dancing in the fiery rings of rainbow rays. Okay? Tell you a little bit about all 4 because they're listing it here. Gnomes. So great a weight of mankind's karma do they bear that the gnomes themselves take on man's ways, becoming grumpy, grouchy, until a sweet teacher appears, like the Blessed Mother in the guise of Snow White, this is the official TSL, to lead them gently up the scale of their earthly evolution under their hierarchs, Virgo and Plur, the masterful beings who maintain the balance of forces in the earth. The gnomes serve in the physical plane just beyond the veil, or spectrum, of ordinary sight. Here they are called the earth elementals. Sometimes you catch sight of them out of the corner of your eye, then think you must have imagined it. That happens to me all the time, although I don't always associate it with gnomes. Usually I think when I see something out of the corner of my eye that it's something a bit more sinister. So if you're blessed enough to have gnomes hanging out in your periphery, more power to you, to be certain. I think what am I looking for? Goblins. I think that mine are probably goblins when I see them around me. Sylphs. Sylphs service the domain of the skies and the air purification and pressure systems. They all observe in the alchemical changes of weather and cycles of photosynthesis and precipitation. Or this one observes in the alchemical, it's an incorrect sentence, I'm trying to correct it, in the alchemical changes of weather and cycles of photosynthesis and precipitation. It must mean this is evident, I think, is probably what they mean by that. This is evident in the alchemical changes. These elementals are masterful creatures who expand and contract their airy bodies from microcosmic to macrocosmic levels, always keeping the flame for the realm of the mind, the mental plane which corresponds to the air element. one of the four elements is designated by the ancient alchemists. Hence, sylphs are known as the air elementals. They respond to the command of their hierarchs, Ares and Thor. Ares and Thor. Really, the one instance in which, for what it's worth, the one interest in which I see male pairing among the in hierarchy, and nobody ever really comments on it beyond the fact that it's Ares and Thor, who are the hierarchs of the sylphs. And then the next paragraph, the configuration of the earth body and earth chemistry reduced to four distinct stages of qualities of substance, fire, air, water, and earth, by the mystical brotherhood of early scientists whose quest to control natural forces included the elusive goal of turning base metals into gold by transmutation, was in fact not far from higher truth. The four lower bodies of man do relate to the so-called four planes of matter serviced by cosmic forces, focusing through the lesser evolved beings of nature. In fact, you may be interested to know that the elementals were also created by Elohim. Okay, that's the connection to Elohim, to serve the sons and daughters of God as they too master the earth sciences and take dominion in space, both inner and outer, and in time, just as man does. As man seeks to conquer his world in the sea of waters and in the sea of light, in the vibrations of subatomic and supersonic realms by way of proving his God control of the universe step by step in all four facets of the kingdoms, unbeknownst to his outer awareness, he is cooperating with elementals who have kept things under control for millions of years. Salamanders. The fiery salamanders hold the secrets of the fire element, corresponding with the etheric body, at precisely what point the physical fire and elusive at precisely what point the physical fire, elusive and most difficult to control, becomes the sacred fire is a mystery taught by the Holy Spirit, observed in the sacred realms, observed in the sacred heart of the saints, touched upon lightly by nuclear scientists, but held firmly in hand by the fire elementals. In obedient and loving service to their hierarchs, their domain stretches from the nucleus of every atom and cell of life to the core of the earth. They are compassionate and brilliant teachers ready to teach mankind practical ways of harnessing universal energy from the heart of the electron to the heart of the sun. That bears repeating. Their domain stretches from the nucleus of every atom and cell of life to the core of the earth. They are compassionate and brilliant teachers ready to teach mankind practical ways of harnessing universal energy from the heart of the electron to the heart of the sun. Moving down one undines. The final one. Water elementals. Portrayed in the elusive but enchanting mermaids, have inspired many a tale of romance between the human and elemental evolutions. That's a plug. This is a plug for the TV show. When we refer to what I propose are the interesting media to watch, various television episodes where they're either referring to TSL matters similar to those addressed by TSL, or are actually somehow contributing to resolving some of the legal problems within church. That show is called Siren. Sirens are akin to mermaids, although I think mermaids are the nice version of sirens. Sirens lure sailors to their deaths with voice, so it's something kind of from the murky underworld. Well, rather, the concept of sirens is part of sort of a dark part of mythology, but mermaids, I think, are the although sirens, I believe, are technically mermaids. But in any event, enchanting mermaids have inspired many a tale of romance between the human and elemental evolutions. Crossing over from the elemental to the human kingdom is a known phenomenon. It is a door that has opened and been shut again to allow, in certain isolated cases, a particularly precious elemental of virtue and attainment to move on in the scale of evolution through the family of humanity, ultimately to acquire the divine spark. More frequently, elementals cross over to the animal kingdom, accelerating evolution by serving man through the highly intelligent species, such as elephants, whales, porpoises, and even particularly loving and responsive dogs or horses. The race memory of such occurrences goes back to the mists of Lemuria and Atlantis. It is held today as a legend or fairy tale, myth or make-believe, by those whose lives would be turned around to suit their pace or personal self-esteem. Were they to take seriously the sub-level of a life wave, perceived at subconscious levels but denied everywhere except in the play of A Midsummer Night's Dream? Speaking of Shakespeare, nevertheless, the serious work of the undines moves on as the oceans and the rivers and the lakes, streams and rivulets and raindrops all play a part in the formation and reformation of the body of our planet and of man, utterly dependent upon the elementals. The undines, who also laugh and play in the waves and waterfalls, lovingly follow the example of their hierarchs. Neptune is the king of the deep, and his consort Luara is mother of tides, okay, governing cycles of fertility in the water element as it affects the emotional body, known as the water feeling or desire body, and the communications of mankind's joy, grief, guilt, anger, and love through the astral plane, strongly influencing the collective unconscious of the race. So for those of you who need more information about the astral realm that is positive, that's what it says right here, because at church, we traditionally refer to what is undesirable in our karmic efforts as being astral often. You don't, and I've heard Elizabeth say, you don't want to mess with the astral. You don't have to rely upon the astral to reach enlightenment, or you shouldn't. It really is more of prayer that you'll receive through the etheric realm. Friday's Order of the Golden Lily clears the discarnate entities from the etheric plane that rings the planet. You don't want anything dead, deceased, or anything up there in that realm. The astral, kind of by virtue of the fact that it is unconscious and emotional, includes like grief and anger and so forth. So that's when you're affected by Uranian influences, or you have a Uranian, there are Uranian tremors and so forth. That's really the problem with the astral, typically, I would say. And then they're going to talk about the consciousness. And I won't read all of it, because basically I'll just be, I'm just doing a recitation here. But I wonder... This looks worth a read, so I'll just read this one last section. It's several paragraphs. The consciousness of the elementals. There's a great difference in the consciousness of the mineral kingdom. There's a great difference in the consciousness of the mineral, vegetable, animal, and human kingdoms serviced by the four types of elementals. Just as the body of man is not aware of itself in sleep, okay, so the mineral kingdom does not possess self-awareness but manifests a specific quality of mineral density, which elemental life has charged into the substance of matter. For example, the gnomes, although scarce recognized by the average Westerner, yet made known to the Irish as the little people, or as mischievous fairies called leprechauns, do exist and impart to the mineral kingdom a wonderful quality of spiritual radiance which passes through the consciousness of the elemental's own being, directly from the sun parents of this system, Helios and Vesta. The gnomes are charged with the responsibility of administering the divine pattern for each rock. This is interesting information emerging. Precious stone, an element of mineral life. By a life token, there are also many ethereal and angelic beings of the Devic evolution responsible for ensouling the God design in the natural order. So that gives you an idea of how the Elohim work through the elementals. Trees and plants, of course, do not possess the awareness of either the human or the elemental consciousness, but have imparted to them by the advanced devas who watch over them a greater degree of life awareness than that retained by the mineral kingdom. The ensoulment of trees and plants by the devas who direct the specific plant elemental is assigned to categories of flora, and exists in such numberless numbers as to tend literally everything that grows, accounts for the undeniable fact that people who attune their spiritual centers to the nature kingdom are able to speak to trees and plants and receive a physically perceptible response to the spark of consciousness communicated to the plant through its nerve system. The life force in plants and animals has been isolated in Kirlian photography, revealing an aura of universal energy, an electromagnetic field also common to man. Stepping up in the scale of life expressions from flora to fauna, we discover by like attunement the group soul of animal species manifesting qualities of higher intelligence. Many animals possess almost human characteristics in an uncanny sense, almost psychic in its display. This is especially true of certain breeds of dogs and horses and is marked in the elephant and the lower primates. Mammals of the sea, fish, seals, and penguins are not excluded from a very wonderful intelligence, and further study by sensitive scientists will reveal a marvelous attunement to the heart of all life everywhere in the nature kingdom. Entomologists never cease to be amazed at the wonders of the ant and there's indication that man has a great deal to learn from the veritable mysteries of nature. I'm paraphrasing this a little bit. Okay, so that's probably enough for now. But if you're interested, please go because it goes on. This is you'll get much more information. You'll also get links to Aries and Thor, Neptune and Luara, Virgo and Pelur. Okay, those will all be mentioned. And I'm going to click through the body elemental so that I can see what we're discussing here. Weird. Okay. A being of nature, ordinarily invisible and functioning and noticed in the physical octave that serves the soul from the moment of its first incarnation, the planes of matter, to tend the physical body. That's a body elemental. About 3 feet high and resembling the individual whom he serves, the body elemental working with the guardian angel under the regenerative Christ self is the unseen friend and helper of man. This devoted servant is man's constant companion throughout his numerous incarnations. It talks about the birth of a child, listen to this, the work of the body elemental, and just as do one paragraph, just as sylphs and salamanders, gnomes, and undines are bowed down by the planetary effluvia, so mankind's body elementals are severely handicapped by the mass consciousness. If the individual is possessed by demons or is under a negative influence, the body elemental cannot help but be affected. Thus, an ailing physical body can be symptomatic of the contamination of the aura and the control of the consciousness by forces untethered to the Christ. Unless challenged in the name of the Christ, these intruders can prevent the body elemental from all foreign interference. These intruders can prevent the body elemental from effectively performing his service. Prevention being the best and safest cure, it behooves man to make daily indications to the Christ self for the freedom and protection of the body elemental from all foreign interference and from all that is not of the light. Laying aside the body. So this is a brief comment about samadhi, okay, relating to the yogis, and what happens sort of in late stage, what happens in the somatic stages. But the topic is laying aside the body, rather the subheader. Even the highest yogis have had moments of great burden and sorrow in leaving their body in their final samadhi, when the soul passes on and does not return. This is called the Maha Samadhi. Almost everyone, with the exception of those who suffer severe psychological detachment from self and body, forms an emotional attachment to the body. After all, this is the body we have worn and worked through, the body that has provided the temple for our soul, and the means by which we experience pleasure and pain on this plane, balance our karma, and do good deeds. So we say, blessed be the tie that binds us to earth when we need to be earthbound to fulfill our reason for being, and blessed be the liberating power of Shiva when it's time to shuffle off this mortal coil. Emotions connected with our attachment to the body are natural, and you should be aware that your body elemental has a consciousness, and its consciousness permeates the physical body. Don't mistake your body elemental's fears for your own. your body elemental is attached to the body because that's his job. He takes care of the body. No more body, no more job. So he's wondering where he's going and what he's going to do when you lay that body aside in your final embodiment. You have to comfort your body elemental as you would a little child and promise him that you are taking him with you to the next octave because he has been a very faithful servant. Tell him he can still be your aide de camp after you've ascended and he'll have plenty of assignments. Okay. So, yeah, and then there's a link also, see also elementals, because now I'm at body elemental, but, so that's interesting too. Elohim, I won't embark on that because it's too long. But I wanted to nail those down because, rather, I wanted to share this information with you because preliminarily, that Raven information is super interesting. It's kind of a separate topic. But principally, it's important to understand that we're really not different. That we're different from the animals, yes, in certain key ways that they themselves will relate to you. You know, one is that they also suffer, and it's hard for them, you know, but they ask to arrive as animals and not as people for a specific reason. As we chose to embody as human beings, they chose to embody as animals. It's not the lazy way out. It's entirely different. It's a different set of expectations. It's a different risk to choose to show up that way, and it's a different way of exchanging gifts and support and information as well, to choose to embody that way in this realm. But what I think is important to understand, they're not inferior. They're really, on the same level as us in terms of importance. We're all loved by God. All who face the sun are loved by God, but the animals basically all have a chance at facing the sun, whereas some of the human beings they make a conscious decision to turn away from that chance. They are fallen and they stay fallen, whereas an animal really can ascend basically at any time. Sure, you might have to train the animal or teach the animal how to love again when it's coming out of a violent situation or a fallen household or a household full of laggards and so forth. I suppose that's a possibility, but the potential is there, whereas you might want it to be the case that your neighbor is going to evolve or change, but it's just not possible for them to do that in this round. It's not possible, whereas as the animal can be saved now. So that's one thing. When people say, why be an animal if it's why choose to incarnate as an animal if that is the lesser way out? It's not really, because they're saying that they won't fail you. They're not equipped to fail, and they refuse. They refuse to take that chance where human beings will say, I'll be a human being. Presumably one chooses to embody as a good human being, but there's a chance if you're a human being that you're just a lost soul. Whether or not animals have souls, that's a little bit of a different story. The church, I believe personally that they do have souls, but the church says kind of sometimes that they don't really have souls, but some of them, like a dog, could be occupied by a self. Like if you see a dog that looks really human, for instance, or you think is a very advanced creature, we say that there's a self sort of occupying that animal. I've heard that, and to the extent that that's fair. What I suspect happens more frequently with animals, and it does happen with people as well, having owned a dog, several dogs, and really they're all like, I think all dogs have quote-unquote sylphs, is that I think they phase in and out of recognition, and they phase in and out of consciousness as well, and in and out of reasoning too, I believe. Whereas people, you kind of have to be on your guard all the time, but it's kind of like an altered state of consciousness for animals often. If you see a cat, sometimes the cat looks very zen, and they are in that zen mood where they're concentrating on interacting with the cosmic all, or they're interacting and communicating with each other psychically, or they're trying to empty their minds. I'm not entirely sure, but they are. That's the form of consciousness. But sometimes if you look at a dog, for instance, they'll just not be entirely. They'll be in animal mode as opposed to sylphic mode, if that's fair to say. And I don't know that sylph is. I think sylph really. I like that that's a tradition, or it's customary to say that at church, and that's okay. I have a sort of semi-affection for that. I'm not entirely convinced that it's what happens, but I do think that, because I think that each animal has its own spirit, at the very least, and that they fade in and out of awareness in this realm. They're often working in other parts of in other planes, in other words, whereas human beings are more often, quote unquote, present. So, but to say dumb dog is not conscious is entirely erroneous, because they are conscious, just not conscious in before you sometimes. And so I think people mistake that for lesser creature, but it's really the people who aren't involved, I think, who have that opinion. So just some observations. But right, they're their own army, they're their own system, but they have a sense of direction and pride. It does differ from what it is that humans do. It supplements what humans do, but it's a different set of it's a different contract entirely. Not entirely actually, but there are differences in those two contracts. When one signs up to be a human being, it's not the same as signing up to be a companion animal, for instance, or a raven. It's a different. Um, they're different characteristics, but they're not greater than or less than. So there's another link for you there. I'm trying to think of who. I wonder if I can find that elemental. There's one guy writing about magical birds. Um, There's a link called Birds with Magical Powers, but I think the link I want actually has the word Raven in the title. Okay, I don't care what Satanism says beyond it being maybe intellectually interesting to know how the enemy is operating. I don't want to put it in terms of enemy, frenemy, or anything like that either. I really shouldn't say enemy, because I think it gives it that sort of tension too much power. It's that when I see Satan, that's not the sort of witchcraft with which I am working. I'm working with the white elemental components of witchcraft and not Satanism. I think it's erroneous to put witchcraft and Satanism under the same banner, or to use it in the same conversation. I find it personally alienating often to encounter it. Although in certain circumstances, to speak about it, say what some might term Satanism in terms of Saturnian magic is maybe more approachable, I think. Warlocks who have crows are because they see in them a kind of spiritual guide through the world of the dead. That's interesting, because that one of the things that he said to me, the really what the bird said to me was that the world of the dead. In a way, when he's looking out into the world and is alarmed by these certain people with the red hats on, or the black, the enshrouded in black, and then there are light bearers. Why is it? The birds want to know, why is it? I think, and isn't it alarming that there are two different kinds of people? And don't you folks who are following the light have to dodge this problem? Which is part of why and we emigrate in mass, and why it is that we are Reformed Zionists, to get out from under the Babylonian death magic. That is that abusive policing and so forth. But that's what it says here, and it also says that witches, quote unquote, generally perform love binding spells and love spells with the help of birds. So, but it's interesting that they're talking in terms an awareness with regard to the world of the dead, because that's basically what you're dealing with in communities in which um, uh, in which the light bearers are at risk. Eagles fly high, so they have a different vantage point. So this was not exactly what I wanted, but it's called Birds of Mother Nature. Then there's Crow and Raven Folklore. I think that the one it's just called the Magic Raven, or maybe it's the Raven's Wing. Let me see if that's what it is. This is, I think, a coven. It's actually a shop. Would have oracle decks and locally sourced artisan gifts and witchcraft herbs or organic herbs as well, blessed herbs. This is a shop in Oakland. It's not. I don't think it's the same site. But wow, they sell. You wouldn't believe the herbs at this place. Wow, there are over 100 different kinds of herbs for sale at theravenswing.com. Okay. Oakland and Portland, Oregon. Okay, so that's the information. Okay, I just wanted to share that with you. Hieromonus, I probably should look at that right now. My thing is, I take exception when people say that they absolutely know what's going on in an animal's brain, or rather in the consciousness of an animal, or how an animal mind works, because it's all speculative if you think about it. Okay, so what was I looking up? Manus. Okay, we're talking about, that's Pali, and we're talking about Buddhism here. I don't have that. Okay, I can't. I don't think I can find it. I'd have to really dig out Buddhism, I think, in order to understand the delineation of Manas. Um, I'm pretty sure that it's one of the. It's considered a consciousness. Okay. And the different the Manas they're different minds, kinds of mind, the four layers of consciousness. Um, and actually, let me direct you to the Mahatma letters, which are theosophic. And this will give you quotes from Madame Blavatsky. The fifth principle often refers to the lower portion of Manas rather than to the whole principle. That is because the Mahatmas were following Alan Hume's classification published in the October 1881 issue of the Theosophist, where the author defines the fifth principle as the animal or physical intelligence. So if that's true, it could be higher Manas. It could be that the guy with whom I spoke said that animals lack a higher Manas, or that was his opinion. I have no idea. We'll have to study it together. But these relate to ego and soul, and there are links to both of those topics at the bottom of this. But you'll find this at theosophy.wiki, okay, which is similar to the Summit Lighthouse encyclopedia. It's organized as a Wikipedia in Wikipedia format, but you can do a search, and Manas is there. Let me see if I can get through some of this. Manas is the Sanskrit word for mind, from the root man, okay, to think. In Hinduism, it is the recording faculty that receives impressions gathered by the sense from the outside world, coordinating sensory impressions before they are presented to the higher faculty of buddhi, the intellect in Hinduism. The higher faculty of buddhi. So maybe the argument was that animals lack that faculty. Manas is one of the four parts of the Antakarana, the internal organ. The other three parts being buddhi, the intellect, chitta, the memory, and ahamkara, the ego. In theosophy, Manas is the fifth principle in human beings. It is the intellectual faculty that allows humans to think, remember, plan, etc. It is also the origin of self-consciousness. During life, this principle is regarded to have a dual nature. On one hand, it is the higher ego, that is the human soul that reincarnates in a body life after life. But once it is incarnated, it gives origin to the lower or personal ego, that is the feeling of I am Mr. Smith, without reference to its true origin as a lasting soul. General description. Manas is regarded as a dual principle in different ways. One of them, as Madame Blavatsky pointed out, is that this is both a principle and an entity. Manas, literally the mind, the mental faculty which makes of man an intelligent and moral being, and distinguishes him from the mere animal. Okay, so they're saying here, maybe that's the difference, is that they're saying here that is the difference. Distinguishes him from the mere animal. A synonym of Mahat. Esoterically, however, it means when unqualified, the higher ego, or the sentient reincarnating principle in man. When qualified, it is called by the Theosophists buddhi. Buddhi Manas, or the spiritual soul, in contradistinction to its human reflection, Kama Manas. It's hard to know exactly what is animal and what is human in all of that, but I'm sure it can be discerned. In its original nature, i.e. on its own plane, Manas is a spiritual entity with omniscience, higher mind, and a spiritual sense of I-ness, higher ego. However, when the moment for incarnation comes, Manas sends a ray from itself to operate through the body, which gives origin to the conditioned faculty of thinking, lower Manas, in the selfish sense of I, lower ego. Some synonyms for higher Manas are higher ego, or simply the ego, reincarnating ego, in capitals, inner man, also in capitals, causal body, Karana Sharira, new, or I'm not sure what that is. French is N-O-U-S, which means we, or inner self. The higher Manas is frequently said to be working in conjunction with buddhi as buddhi Manas. And for information on the Buddhic self, Lipo recorded some information about buddhi and buddhi Manas that I think is advanced Summit. It's not really present in the early stages of Summit development. The principle of mind is the other topic header. It says higher Manas and lower Manas, but there is nothing under lower Manas here. Kind of interesting. There's no content. They neglected to include content at all. It's just the header, lower Manas. Higher Manas says in its purely metaphysical aspect, Manas being again one remove on the downward plane from Buddhi is still so immeasurably higher than the physical man that it cannot enter into direct relation with the personality except through its reflection in the lower mind. Self-consciousness, I'm almost done. While Atman has been defined as conscious non-consciousness, and Buddhi as universal consciousness, Manas is the principle of self-consciousness, the I am I. Because this principle is the origin of the sense of I-ness, it is called the ego. Ego, I, the consciousness of man of the I am I, or the feeling of I am-ship. Esoteric philosophy teaches the existence of two egos in man, the mortal or personal, and the higher, the divine or impersonal, calling the former personality and the latter individuality. And I do have more insight about those two different kinds of ego, having experienced their discovery through my involvement as a chaplain in church. People speak in terms of letting go of your ego a lot in Buddhism. Particularly, I think early Buddhists will say it's really about quote-unquote losing ego, which I have a little bit of a problem with that teaching, where it's present. I don't think it's necessarily universally present, but when I was younger and trying to get into Buddhism, I remember encountering that. And the reality is you really do need an ego, but I believe it's the superego. I'm not exactly sure how the Jungians and so forth utilize all of that, although I think consciousness and superconsciousness are referred to as two separate sort of locations in Summit, also in Buddhism, probably Hinduism as well. But there are really two different kinds of ego. There's the ego that you encounter as a lower, I don't want to say a lower form of humanity. When you're younger, it's controlling the fact that you, how do I put it? People call someone egotistical, or when people are acting in a self-centered manner, it's because there's a quote-unquote disruption or problem developmentally or in formation, maybe, with what we call ego. But then you still do need ego when you move on, and it really becomes collective ego, and it's a collective part of identity as well. Also for things like work and on your professional path and so on. So to say lose one's ego, I think is not correct at all. But we have to move beyond those early stages. I think everybody probably checking this out right now is already beyond that phase where they're struggling with quote-unquote ego issues developmentally and so forth. So two different kinds of ego. There's an ego that you actually do need. You need to maintain it as well. And sometimes it's great to have a huge ego if you're bringing light to a lot of people and so forth. Right. The meaning of the word ego in theosophy is not restricted to the one modern. The meaning of the word ego in theosophy is not restricted to the one modern psychology gives. It is used to refer to the sense of I-ness, okay, which can be expressed in a personal and selfish way through the lower manas, as well in a spiritual and impersonal form through the higher manas. So ego manifests itself in two ways. It's the lower manas ego and then the higher manas ego. Higher ego, topic header, in connection to the latter, Madame Blavatsky wrote, the human ego is neither Atman nor Buddhi, but the higher manas, the intellectual fruition and the efflorescence of the intellectual self-conscious egotism in the higher spiritual sense. This is the real individuality. So, in other words, you don't want the psychiatrists and all of these fallen people and professions attacking you because you're religious. That's part of the point here. Because religious people often have that ego that is highly developed, that is not, it's not Atma or Buddhi, but is the higher manas itself, is according to Madame Blavatsky, which is the intellectual fruition. It's the benefit, the intellectual fruition and the efflorescence of the intellectual self-conscious egotism. So to have a very developed religious intellect is also a sign of a healthy ego, and having quote-unquote ego as well. So in the higher spiritual sense, when the higher ego has to incarnate, let me get one sentence in. This is the real individuality, or the divine man. It is this ego which, having originally incarnated in the senseless human form, animated by, but unconscious of the presence in itself of the dual monad, made of that human-like form of a real form. Let me get this sentence back to you. This is the real individuality or the divine man. It is this ego which, having originally incarnated in a senseless human form animated by but unconscious, since it had no consciousness of the presence in itself of the dual monad, made of that human-like form a real man. It's a difficult sentence. It is that ego, that causal body. That's good to know. She's calling it causal body, which overshadows every personality karma forces it to incarnate into. When the higher ego has to incarnate, it sends a ray to animate the body, giving origin to the lower ego. When the higher ego has to incarnate, it sends a ray to animate the body, giving origin to the lower ego. So this isn't really, it's not really about sense of self at all. It is about sense of self, but it's all, I think it's about the actual manifestation of, as she's saying, the intellect, the efflorescence of the intellect, and intellectual fruition of the self-conscious egotism, quoting from before. Manas is, as it were, a globe of pure divine light, a ray from the world soul, a unit from a higher sphere, in which there is no differentiation. Descending to a plane of differentiation, it emanates a ray which is itself, and which can only manifest through the personality already differentiated. This ray is the lower manas, while the globe of divine light, a kumara on its own plane, is the higher ego, or the higher manas, manas proper. And in a way, that's talking about the ascension, if you think about it. She's referring to Kumara, 7 holy Kumaras, the 7 entities that were beginning at the creation of time, the dawn of existence. There were 7 Kumaras, and some say Jesus is one of those Kumaras. But she's referring to ego as higher manas or manas proper. Okay, and then it closes with the 5th principle, and this is a reference to the Mahatma letters. In the Mahatma letters to A.P. Sinnett, especially those before the publication of the Esoteric Buddhism, the phrase 5th principle often refers to the lower portion of manas rather than to the whole principle. This is because the Mahatmas were following Hume's classification published, where the author defines the 5th principle as the animal or physical intelligence. It could be that the guy with whom I chatted briefly was referring to the 5th principle as being animal intelligence. It could be that he said that they only have the 5th principle, which I don't know. Like, it's hard to say whether I think a dog has a superego or has access to a superego. I do. I don't think dogs are simply dwelling within their own sense of self. To the extent that they have a sense of self, I doubt sincerely that a dog doesn't have a sense of self, just like I doubt sincerely that a dog doesn't plan, and so forth. But it's all interesting to discuss. And with lots of links at the conclusion of that, which probably contain really interesting information. And then, but again, this is if you want to go here and read Theosophy, and I can tell by the symbol that this is actually the official school. You may go and take a look at that. This is, what do we call it? TTS. TTS is actually the Theosophical Society. We began as we are really descendants of Madame Blavatsky, and we're descendants of and TTS is the official Madame Blavatsky church. Okay, back then it wasn't called TTS, I don't think, when she started it. Although I think she actually started, quote unquote, the Theosophical Society in the 19th century. But she's interesting. She came from Russia, but ended up coming to New York and doing a lot of her spiritual work in New York City. And of course, she's important to study and know about. But it's theosophy.wiki /en, Echo November, /Manas, MANAS. Okay, so that looks interesting. Probably that's all for now. If you want to visit the shop I mentioned, it's theravenswing.com, and it's notable. I go to a lot of stores like this for the number of herbs it offers. There are probably some on-site spiritual practitioners, astrologers, intuitive tarot readers, a second one who does tarot, um, a diviner. So these people are probably interesting to work with, and you actually have sessions. You can sign up for 30-minute or 60-minute sessions with them, and let's see, Rowan, mixed race intuitive, Willow offering scarab readings, and an empath. And this gentleman who works with African and within an African diasporic realm of magic and spirit work. I think diasporic probably is the correct pronunciation. It must be diasporic then. Yeah, so I mean, it probably is. Okay, well, in any event, check that out. And then, particularly if you're following what I said about Wicca before, I'm not saying we're Wiccan, by the way, and I understand that. Certainly always want to protect our shrine, our inner temple. You know, absolutely, and it doesn't include every last. We have our own path. You can't possibly, with 8 different world religions intersecting, you can't follow every holiday ever. You follow our church's standard, just because it's more galvanizing and unifying to stay within church. So I support that. But Wicca is interesting because it reverberates within CUT as well, although we are ardently anti quote unquote witchcraft. Or sometimes Mother is ardently anti-witchcraft, and really, as I said in other videos, she really means black sorcery, because what we practice is technically a form of magic within the Summit Lighthouse, even though we don't say that we're magicians traditionally. Well, I shouldn't say that, because I have seen the word magic used with regard to our prayer work periodically, but we're, as you know, we're also very devout Christians and Buddhists. So, but check this out if you'd like to. And I'm going to close this right now. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, these are really interesting people. They're all sensitives. And a lot of it is tarot, and I can do that for you as well. And as a matter of fact, to make some money to get out of here, probably what I should try to do is to throw up a site. But I don't know that going back into tarot right now is entirely so that I can do individual 60-minute sessions for people and get compensated. No. It might be better for me to focus on astrology if I'm going to be selling my services online, because we are astrologers, Christian astrologers, but astrologers nonetheless at church. And tarot, I think, has there's a dark there are some complicated images on some of the forms. some of the cards that some of it comes from Aleister Crowley and is ergo fallen, according to the church. So you have to kind of bear that in mind, maybe too. I've never seen tarot practiced within the Summit Lighthouse as a regular astrology, yes, but not tarot. It doesn't mean that I won't do it or that it's not appropriate. It's actually good in my view. I recommend studying tarot because it'll help you understand the planets and the houses and so forth. And tarot really, if you're an advanced astrologer, one should have advanced astrological skills to do tarot because each of the cards, each of the major arcana are affiliated with a planet or a sign, and it's really good to know those. And I have those, I have recorded not only those, but also the difference between the Thoth, or depending upon how you say it, Thoth, tarot, which is Aleister Crowley, and the Rider-Waite tarot, which precedes Aleister Crowley. So he made some changes and so forth. It's interesting to see his mindset when he went through and said that he's moving the Strength card and renaming it Lust, for instance, and all of that. There are not a lot of changes, but there are some key differences in how he organized those. And I'm studying that, and with any luck, I'll be doing tarot readings down in Booth Bay Harbor before too much longer in person for people, as well at some juncture, or one of my manifestations. Well, I'm not sure if it'll be the chaplain or not, but I'll answer questions for you and I'll keep you posted with regard to how what's going on. But it's important to honor the legacy as it is revealed, because it is a separate path and it is a source of power for all the people within the church. The adherence is a source of power, and the codification is a source of power as well, and the basis and the substrate for our form of magical practice. So someone wants to come in and say, I like your church, but I want it to be more Wiccan. Why not like it like Wicca and then see us as a separate organization, and incorporate where it's appropriate to do so, but to be conscious and respectful, because it's the better path and the more powerful and productive path to do that. But excluding Wicca entirely from the conversation, yeah, it's different. But I think that assailing it is wrong-headed. Assailing black practices is wrong-headed. Assailing animal sacrifice is wrong-headed. But the true Wicca would not support animal sacrifice. So use caution if you're going down these other paths. But I have experience on those other paths, so I can direct people who are inquiring. Anyway, that's the information about elementals, and I hope that it's helpful for you. Namaste, walk in the light, and thank you for sharing with me today, and I hope that this was interesting. I'll try to get that Raven link to you guys for people who want to know what he left in his note. Okay, take care, and God bless, and please like me, distribute me to your friends, the link to your friends. If you're able to give at all financially, the goal, I can, eventually I'd like to be able to have the resources to write a prospectus so that we can say, all of us can say, we want to start a church in Maine, we want, or New York City. When is this going to happen? How much money is it going to cost, and who's going to be involved? But planning costs money as well, so donations to me directly would help me to get out of the current ashram, which is not properly situated, and to invest in a bricks and mortar church so that we can all get together and worship and study together in my realm, which is Order of Truth, which is a holy order of the Summit Lighthouse that I'm resurrecting. It was discontinued in the 70s, and I'm in the process of resurrecting it so that I can integrate better with Church Universal and Triumphant. So that's what's happening. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you folks later, and signing off for now. Thanks again. Bye-bye.